Cole Mercer pressed both hands flat against the saloon bar and took the humiliation without flinching. Every man in the room stared at him like he was something that had crawled in off a dead trail. His coffee sat untouched. His pride sat somewhere on the floor. He'd been in that town 4 hours, and already they knew his name, not as a cowboy, not as a worker, not as a man looking for a second chance. They knew it as a killing. If you want to know whether one broken man and one exhausted woman can hold a dying ranch together against everything a corrupt town throws at them, subscribe to this channel. Follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1888 did not arrive in the mountains of Wyoming territory the way summers do in gentler country. It came like a fist. It came with dust that turned the back of a man's throat to chalk and heat that pressed down off the ridgelines before 9 in the morning and didn't lift until well after dark. The pines gave no shade worth mentioning. The creek beds were either low or gone, and the mountain road that wound down out of the high country into the small town of Greer Hollow was the kind of road that beat a man down to his marrow by the time he reached the bottom of it. Cole Mercer reached the bottom of it at 10:30 on a Tuesday. He was 32 years old, and he looked 40. Not from softness. Cole Mercer had never been soft a day in his life, but from the kind of years that file themselves into a man's face and don't apologize for doing it. He was broad across the shoulders, lean through the middle with hands that were rope-scarred and sun-dark and bigger than they needed to be. His hat was beige and battered and tilted against the glare. His dark leather vest had a chest pocket on the left side holding $3 and a folded letter of character from a prison warden who had written it with something close to genuine feeling, which was not the warden's custom. He had one bedroll, one worn saddle, one horse, and a past that had arrived in Greer Hollow somewhere around sunrise 3 hours before he did. He did not know that last part yet. He rode into town looking for work. That was the whole of his intention. He had $43 total when he left Canyon City. He had spent 40 of it getting this far north, replacing a thrown shoe, eating twice, and bribing a toll keeper outside of Rollins who had studied his papers too long and with too much satisfaction. What remained was barely enough to buy a meal and a place to sleep for 2 nights while he found employment. He was not afraid of labor. He was good with horses, very good in the particular way that only comes from years of having nothing to do but think quietly and observe without agenda. He knew mountain trails. He knew cattle. He knew fencing and water management and how to read the land for where runoff would go in August, when everything above 10,000 feet baked dry. He had been a good cowhand before. He intended to be one again. He tied his horse at the rail in front of the general store and stood for a moment in the street with his hat in his hand and looked at Greer Hollow the way a man looks at a town he has not yet decided to trust. It was a real town. Not big, but real. A saloon, a church, a bank with a fresh painted sign, a doctor's shingle, a livery, a row of proper storefronts with plank sidewalks and hitching rails, and women in full skirts picking through goods set out in front of the dry goods. 2 men on the bench outside the barber watched him with the patient hostility of men who had nothing better to do than notice strangers. He put his hat back on and walked toward the saloon. That was where a working man went first in a town like this. Not because he wanted a drink. Cole Mercer had not had a drink in 4 years and did not intend to start, but because a saloon was where he would learn fastest, who needed a ranch hand, who was short on horses broke and shod, who was behind on fencing before the fall market. He pushed through the doors and stepped into the cooler dark. 12 men, maybe 14. Mid-morning crowd, mostly ranch hands and a couple of townsmen with nothing urgent to do. The bartender looked up from a glass he was polishing, and his expression shifted in a way that was subtle but unmistakable, like a door being locked from the inside. Cole walked to the bar and set his hat on the wood. "Coffee if you've got it," he said. "And I'm looking for work. Any outfit around here needing a mountain hand for the season." The bartender poured the coffee without a word. Cole wrapped his hands around the cup and let the silence in the room do what it was going to do. It did not take long. "You Cole Mercer?" The voice came from a table to his left. Cole turned. The man who had spoken was thick-necked and red-faced with a rancher's build, and the kind of expression that had probably passed for authority in this town for a long time. He was looking at Cole the way men look at a problem they've decided not to bother solving gently. "I am," Cole said. "Thought so." The man leaned back in his chair. "Heard you was headed this way. Word comes down the mountain faster than you'd think." "Apparently," Cole said. "You killed a man in Canyon City." Cole kept his hands around the coffee cup. "A man died. A judge decided how it happened. I served what the court gave me. I'm out legal, and I'm working legal." "A man died," the red-faced man repeated with a slow, ugly smile like he was tasting something. "That's a real pretty way to say you put a fella in the ground." "It's an accurate way," Cole said. "I don't dress things up." The room had gone very quiet. The bartender had stopped pretending to polish the glass. A young man near the window had turned entirely around in his chair to watch. The red-faced man stood up. His name was Wade Harlan. Cole didn't know that yet, but he would. "Son," Harlan said, though Cole was not his son, and did not want to be. "There ain't a single outfit in this valley that's going to put a convicted killer on their payroll. Not mine. Not the Tesler brothers. Not the Garrity crew. You understand what I'm telling you? You rode down that mountain for nothing." Cole looked at him for a long moment. "I understand you," Cole said. "I don't agree with you, but I hear you fine." Harlan's jaw tightened. "I'm going to ask you real polite to finish that coffee and ride back to wherever you came from." "I paid for the coffee," Cole said. "I'll finish it." He did. Slowly. With every eye in the room on him, he drank the entire cup without hurrying, set it down on the bar, placed 2 coins beside it, picked up his hat, and walked out through the doors the same way he'd come in. He stood on the plank sidewalk in the full blaze of the morning and breathed. He had not hit anyone. He had not raised his voice. He had not let the thing that lived in him, the hot, ugly thing that had cost him 5 years of his life, come anywhere near his hands. That was a victory, even if it looked like nothing. He was 2 steps from his horse and 30 seconds from riding straight back up into the mountains when he heard it. Not an argument. Not a shout. Something worse. A woman's voice, tight and controlled, and losing the battle to stay that way. He turned. Across the street in front of the general store, a man in a clean vest and a clean hat was talking to a woman in a wheat-colored prairie dress who was standing very still in the way people stand when they are working hard, not to fall apart in public. Beside her, holding the fraying rope of a thin mule, was a boy of about 9 who was staring at the man in the clean vest with the particular expression children get when they understand more than adults want them to. The man in the clean vest was Silas Granger. Cole would learn that name soon enough, too. "Mrs. Hart," Granger was saying in the smooth, patient voice of a man who has practiced sounding reasonable while doing unreasonable things. "I am not your enemy. I want you to believe that sincerely. The bank has been more than patient with your account." "The bank has been more than patient," Evelyn Hart repeated quietly, like she was testing the shape of those words. "My husband built that ranch with his hands. He paid on that note for 11 years. "And the note continues," Granger said, "with interest, which, as I've explained, has accumulated to a figure that—" "I know the figure." Her voice did not crack, but it came close. "You've told me the figure 4 times since February." "Why?" "Then you understand that without a substantial payment by the end of August—" "I understand," she said. And she stopped him there with those 2 words because she had nothing else to put after them that wouldn't undo her entirely. Granger reached into his vest and produced a folded document and held it out to her. She took it. She looked at it. Her hands were very still. "The process is simply procedural," Granger said. "A precaution. Nothing has been decided." He tipped his hat, a precise, rehearsed movement, and walked away. Evelyn Hart stood holding the paper for a moment. Then she folded it, put it in her pocket, and turned back to the mule and the wagon she had loaded for the return trip. The wagon had one rear wheel sitting badly wrong on the axle, and when she put her shoulder to the side panel to check the load, the whole thing shifted and threatened. "Mama," the boy said. "I see it," she said. "It's fine. Don't worry." It was not fine. Cole watched her try to right the axle fitting from the outside, while the boy held the mule steady and looked frightened in the way children look frightened when they're trying to be useful. After 30 seconds, he walked across the street. "Ma'am," he said, "let me look at that." She turned. She had dark eyes and a face that was handsome and tired in equal measure, and she looked at him the way women in hard country look at strange men, with a complete and unsentimental evaluation that took about 3 seconds. "I don't know you," she said. "No, ma'am. Cole Mercer. I'm passing through. But that axle's sitting wrong, and if you try to roll on it as is, you'll lose the wheel before you clear the edge of town." She looked at him another moment. Then she stepped back. He crouched down beside the wheel and looked at it properly. The axle nut had worked loose over a long road, and the wheel had shifted outward maybe a 1/4 inch, which was enough. He had the tool he needed in his saddle roll. He went and got it, came back and fixed it in under 10 minutes, while the boy watched with the focused, unblinking attention of a child who is learning everything he can about everything he sees. "You know a lot about wagons," the boy said. "Enough," Cole said. "Do you know about horses too?" "Some. Our best mare's been going lame on the left front. Papa used to fix her, but Papa's gone." "Noah," Evelyn said quietly. The boy fell silent, but he kept watching Cole. Cole stood up and dusted his knees. "That should hold you. Get it looked at proper soon as you can, but it'll carry you home today." "Thank you," Evelyn said, and she meant it. He could hear that she meant it. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing." She studied him again. Something shifted in her expression, not warmly, but thoughtfully. "You said Mercer. Cole Mercer." "Yes, ma'am." She went still. He saw it, the recognition, the name landing in her, the way it landed in every room he walked into these days, like a stone dropped in still water. "You were in the saloon," she said. It was not a question. Wade Harlan was in there this morning. He would have... "He said his piece," Cole said. "I heard him." She was quiet for a moment. He expected her to take a step back. Most people did at about this point. He was used to it. He was not used to liking it, but he was used to it. "Are you looking for work?" she said. He looked at her. "Yes, ma'am." "Honest work. That's the only kind I know how to do anymore." She glanced toward the saloon, then toward the bank, then back at him. "I have a ranch," she said, "up the north side of the mountain, 12 miles out. It's not in good shape. I've got cattle that are thin as spring, that's half-dry fences that need a month of attention, and a mare that's been limping since May." She paused. "I can't pay much. The situation you just witnessed at the general store, that paper he gave me, that is the situation." "I heard some of it," he said. "Then you know it's not a prosperous outfit. And I should be honest with you, the town will talk. They already talk. A widow hiring a..." She stopped, started again. "They will talk more." "Ma'am," Cole said, "I just got told to my face by a room full of men that nobody in this valley will have me. You are the only person in Greer Hollow who's asked me a single honest question today. If you're offering work, I'm accepting it." Evelyn Hart looked at him for a long, considering moment. Her son was watching him with an expression that was trying very hard not to look like hope. "You'd sleep in the barn," she said. "That's fine. You'd take your meals separate until I know you better." "Understood." "And if I tell you to go," she said, "you go. No argument. No delay." "Yes, ma'am." She held out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm and dry, and she let go quickly, and that was how Cole Mercer came to be employed at the Hart Ranch on a Tuesday morning in the summer of 1888, with half the town watching from windows and doorways, and 3 men standing outside the barber shop who would have the story running up and down the valley before supper. The ride out to the ranch took the better part of 2 hours. Evelyn drove the wagon. Cole rode alongside. The boy sat in the wagon bed and watched Cole's horse with the focused intensity of a child who has recently decided that horses are the most important thing in the world. They did not talk much on the road. Cole was not a man who filled silence for the sake of it, and Evelyn Hart did not appear to be either. But halfway out on a stretch of mountain road, where the trail narrowed, and the pines closed in, and the heat pressed down thicker than it had in town, the boy spoke up. "Mr. Mercer." "Cole." "Cole, were you really in prison?" "Noah," Evelyn started. "It's all right," Cole said. He looked over his shoulder at the boy. "Yes, I was." Noah absorbed this. "For killing someone. For a fight that went too far. A man died. I didn't set out for that to happen, but it did, and I am the reason it did, and I served what I was given." Noah was quiet for a moment. "Do you feel bad about it?" "Every day," Cole said. "I expect I will every day I've got left." Noah nodded slowly, like this was the answer he had been testing for, and it had come back true. "Okay," he said, and he turned back to watching the horse. Evelyn said nothing, but Cole saw her hands shift slightly on the reins. The ranch sat in a fold of the mountain where the land went from steep to level in a way that made sense for cattle and water both, or had made sense once before. The summer dried the spring down to a thin thread, and the grass on the high pasture went from green to a pale brittle gold. The house was sound, but plain. The barn needed 2 new boards on the south face. The horse shed was leaning. The fencing along the eastern pasture had been repaired so many times in so many different ways that it looked like a patchwork quilt laid flat on the ground. Cole sat on his horse for a moment and looked at it all. "I know how it looks," Evelyn said from beside him. "It looks like it needs a lot of work," he said. "Yes, I can do a lot of work." She looked at him sideways. "Why?" He considered the question honestly. "Because I need to be somewhere I'm useful," he said. "Because standing still after what I've been through is the most dangerous thing I can do. And because—" He paused. "Because that boy's been watching me since town like he's trying to decide whether I'm worth believing in. And I'd rather give him a reason to believe in something good." Evelyn said nothing for a long moment. "The lame mare's in the 3rd stall," she said finally. "Left front like Noah told you. Settle your horse, then come take a look at her. Supper's at 6. I'll leave yours on the step." She clicked the mule forward and drove the wagon toward the house. Cole dismounted, led his horse to the barn, and stood in the dim heat of it for a moment, with his hand on his horse's neck and his eyes closed. He had a place to sleep. He had honest work. He had a woman who had hired him knowing full well what she was bringing onto her land. And somewhere in the house above the hill, a 9-year-old boy was probably already at the window watching the barn. He had been called a killer today. He had been turned out of a saloon. He had been warned off by the loudest man in the valley. And yet, here he was, still standing. He opened his eyes, led his horse into a stall, and got to work. The mare's name was Dulcie, and she had not let anyone touch her left foreleg in 11 weeks. Cole found that out the hard way when he reached for it in the 3rd stall, and she swung her head around with her ears flat and her teeth showing, and he had to step back fast or lose a chunk of his shoulder. He did not curse at her. He did not yank the lead. He just stood there in the heat of the barn and breathed and waited the way he had learned to wait in a place where patience was the only currency worth having. After a while, Dulcie lowered her head. After a while longer, she let him try again. He worked slowly, keeping his hand on her shoulder first, then her barrel, then her flank, talking the whole time in the low, even voice that he had spent 5 years learning to use on frightened things, because in Canyon City there had been frightened things of all kinds, and the ones that respected a quiet voice were the ones that didn't get anyone hurt. He worked his hand down her leg inch by inch. When he got to the fetlock, she trembled but held. When he lifted the foot, she groaned and shifted her weight, but stayed. He looked at it for a long time. Then he set it down, gently stood up, and walked to the barn door. Evelyn was crossing the yard from the house. "Well," she said, "there's a bruised frog and the start of an abscess working underneath," he said. "Whoever shot her last put the shoe on slightly off angle. It's been pressing wrong for weeks. She needs the shoe pulled, the hoof packed and wrapped, and about 2 weeks off that foot entirely." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "She's my best working horse." "She will be again," he said. "But not if she goes lame permanent. You push her through an abscess like that, you'll lose the hoof and the horse both." She looked at him like she was measuring whether to argue. Then she said, "Can you do it yourself? The pulling and the packing?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then do it." She turned back toward the house, then stopped without turning around. "Supper's on the step. It's not much. I want you to know that's not how it always was." "Ma'am, anything hot is more than I had this morning." She walked back to the house without answering, but her shoulders had shifted in a way that might have been something. Cole could not have said what. He went back into the barn and got to work on Dulcie's foot, and he did not let himself think too hard about the way Evelyn Hart carried exhaustion, like it was the one thing she refused to put down. The supper was salt pork and cornbread and a jar of preserved peaches, and it was without question the best meal Cole Mercer had eaten in 5 years. He sat on the step of the barn and ate it alone in the cooling dark, and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling around him, the cattle shifting the horses, breathing a nightbird somewhere in the pines above the pasture, and felt something he had almost forgotten the name of. Quiet. Not silence. Quiet. The difference between the two was everything. He was washing the plate at the pump when Noah appeared from the direction of the house, barefoot and moving with the careful casualness of a child who has very definitely not been given permission to be where he is. "You're supposed to be asleep," Cole said. "I know," Noah said. He sat down on the edge of the water trough like he had simply decided this was where he lived now. "Is Dulcie going to be okay?" "She's going to be fine. She bit Jimmy Castor when he tried to check her foot. He's the blacksmith's boy," he cried. "She didn't bite me," Cole said. Noah looked at him with great seriousness. "Why not?" "Because I didn't reach for the foot first. You reach for the thing that hurts first. An animal thinks you're trying to hurt it worse. You got to earn the foot." Noah chewed on that. "Is that true for people too?" Cole looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "I reckon it is." Noah was quiet for a moment, swinging his bare feet above the ground. Then, "My father died in March. It was his heart. He was 41 years old, and it was his heart, and the doctor said it just gave out." He said it the way children say things that they have rehearsed alone many times, getting the words right before the feelings catch up with them. "Mama doesn't talk about it much. She says talking about it doesn't feed the cattle." "Your mama's practical," Cole said. "She cries sometimes," Noah said, "when she thinks I'm asleep, but I'm not always asleep." Cole said nothing. "She works too hard," Noah said. "She was up before I was this morning and she didn't stop until after dark. She does that every day." He looked at Cole with the directness that only the very young and the very old manage without trying. "Are you going to stay?" "I'm hired for the season," Cole said. "That's not what I asked." Cole looked at this 9-year-old boy for a moment and felt something shift in his chest that he wasn't ready to examine. "Go to bed, Noah," he said. "We've got work in the morning." Noah slid off the trough. "Good night, Cole." He padded back toward the house, then turned once. "I'm glad Mama hired you, even if the town's going to be horrible about it." Then he was gone. Cole sat in the dark for a long time after that. The next 2 weeks moved in a rhythm that Cole had not known since before the worst night of his life. Up before light. Feed and water the horses. Check the fencing along the lower pasture where 3 posts had rotted at the base and were leaning into each other like tired old men. haul rock out of the trail above the spring, which had been partly blocked by winter runoff and was trickling when it should have been running. Teach Noah, who appeared at his elbow every morning with the reliability of sunrise, how to read a horse's ears, how to approach from the shoulder instead of the front, how to tie a proper hitch that would hold under real load. Evelyn watched all of this from a careful distance. She was not a woman who trusted easily, and Cole did not expect her to be. What he did notice was that the distance shortened slowly, the way distance always shortens when two people are working hard in the same direction. By the end of the first week, she was talking to him directly at the start of the day, instead of leaving instructions on the step with his supper. By the middle of the second week, they were eating at the same table with Noah between them, asking questions at the rate of about one per minute, and the silence between the questions was no longer uncomfortable. It was just silence. The kind that meant something was being built. But the town did not let them have it clean. On the Thursday of the second week, Evelyn rode down to Greer Hollow for supplies, and came back 2 hours later with everything on her list, and a look on her face that she had clearly been holding in place for the entire 12-mile ride home. Cole was at the fence line when she drove past. He could see it from 50 yards, the tight set of her jaw, the way she kept her eyes on the road ahead instead of glancing toward him the way she usually did. He finished his work and found her in the house putting away the provisions, with the focused aggression of someone who is keeping their hands busy so they don't do something else with them. "What happened in town?" he said from the doorway. "Nothing I didn't expect," she said. "Evelyn." She stopped. It was the first time he had used her given name, and they both registered it. She set down the tin she was holding and turned around. "Margaret Castor," she said, "told me in the middle of the dry goods store loud enough for everyone to hear that she felt it was her Christian duty to inform me that letting a convict live on my property was putting my son at risk and my reputation past saving." She paused. She said it with her hand on my arm, like she was concerned. Cole said nothing. Then Reverend Albright stopped me outside the feed store and suggested that in my grief, I may have made a decision I hadn't thought through and offered to help me find a reliable hand through the church network. She picked up the tin again, turned it over in her hands. And on the way out of town, Wade Harlan pulled his horse alongside my wagon and said that a woman in my position ought to be careful about the company she keeps, and that when I was ready to be reasonable, there were people willing to help me with my situation. "What situation?" Cole said. "The ranch, the debt, the bank." Her voice had gone very flat. He didn't say Granger's name, but he didn't have to. "They're friendly. Everyone knows it." Cole put his hand on the doorframe and looked at her and said carefully, "Do you want me to go?" She met his eyes. "No," she said. "I want you to fix the water trough in the north paddock. The cattle are walking a quarter mile to drink because the pipe's blocked, and I've been meaning to see to it for 3 weeks. "All right," he said. She turned back to her provisions. "Cole." She did not look at him. "I hired you because I needed the work done, and I was tired of making decisions out of fear. I'm not going to unmake that decision because Margaret Castor thinks she has the right to an opinion about my property." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Don't yes, ma'am me like I said something admirable," she said. "I said something practical. There's a difference." "Is there?" he said. She turned around. For a moment something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or the beginning of something she wasn't ready to name. Then she pointed at the north paddock and said, "Water trough, now please." He went. He was halfway to the paddock when he heard her faintly through the open house window laugh. It was a short sound, quickly controlled like she had caught it by surprise. But he heard it, and he carried it with him the rest of the afternoon, the way a man carries something he doesn't want to drop. The twist came on a Friday, and it came from the direction Cole had been watching the least. He had been watching for Harlan. He had been watching for some kind of move from Granger, a letter, a messenger, another visit dressed up in polite language. What he had not been watching for was the boy. Noah came running to the barn at noon with his boots on the wrong feet and his face white as chalk. "Cole!" He grabbed Cole's arm with both hands. Mama's at the house with a man from the bank, not Granger, someone else, a clerk, and he's got papers, and Mama's not talking right." Cole put down the tool he was holding and looked at the boy. "Not talking right how?" "She stopped in the middle of a sentence," Noah said. "She just stopped. And she's standing there looking at the paper and she went real quiet. And that's worse than when she's angry. You know that's worse." Cole was already moving. He came through the back door of the house the way you come into a place when you're trying not to announce yourself, quiet and steady, and with his hat in his hand. The front room held Evelyn standing very still beside the table, and across from her, a young bank clerk in a stiff collar who was sweating visibly in the noon heat and holding a leather satchel in both hands. Cole read the room in about 2 seconds. The paper on the table was a formal notice. He could see the bank letterhead from where he stood. "Ma'am," he said. Evelyn looked at him. Her face was composed. Her eyes were not. "This is Mr. Pell," she said with careful courtesy. "He's from the Granger Territorial Bank. He's brought me a notice of accelerated foreclosure." Cole looked at the clerk. The clerk looked at Cole and visibly reconsidered his posture. "Accelerated," Cole said. "On what grounds?" Pell cleared his throat. "The terms of the original loan include a clause permitting the bank to accelerate the debt schedule in cases of diminished property value or material change in operational capacity." He was clearly reciting this. "The bank has assessed the property and determined." "When did the bank assess the property?" Cole said. Pell blinked. "The assessment was conducted." "Was anyone from this ranch present for that assessment?" "Standard procedure doesn't require." "Was anyone from this ranch notified in advance that an assessment was being conducted on their land?" Cole kept his voice level. The thing in his chest that wanted to get loud, he held behind his back like a weapon he'd decided not to draw. "Because a property assessment conducted without the owner's knowledge or presence used to trigger an acceleration clause is worth looking at real carefully before anyone signs or agrees to anything." Pell's mouth opened and closed. "I'm not a lawyer," Cole said, "but I spent 5 years reading law in a place that had a very good library and very long winters. Mrs. Hart, do not sign anything today." Evelyn looked at the clerk. "I'll need to review the notice with my own counsel," she said. "You can tell Mr. Granger I received it." Pell picked the paper up from the table, then seemed uncertain whether he was supposed to leave it or take it. "Mrs. Hart, Mr. Granger is very hopeful that we can resolve this situation without—" "Thank you, Mr. Pell," Evelyn said. "You've got a long ride back." The clerk left. The room was very quiet. Noah was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. Evelyn looked at him and said, "Go check on Dulcie for me, sweetheart." And the boy went because he understood when he was being given something to do, so the adults could speak plainly. Evelyn sat down at the table. Cole sat across from her. "Accelerated foreclosure," she said. "The full amount. Not by the end of summer, by the end of next month." I heard him. "I don't have the full amount." "I know. If the assessment was done without my knowledge, then there may be grounds to challenge the acceleration," Cole said. "That doesn't mean it's easy or guaranteed. It means there's something to work with." He leaned forward slightly. "Evelyn, do you have your original loan documents?" She looked at him. "Yes." "The deed, the water rights filing, everything your husband signed when he took the property." "It's all in a box under the bed," she said. "James kept everything." "Then tonight, after Noah's asleep, we look at all of it, every page, every date, every signature." He held her eyes. "I'm not going to let them take this place out from under you on paperwork, not if the paperwork doesn't hold." She was quiet for a moment. "You said you're not a lawyer." "No," he said. "But Silas Granger's counting on you not knowing the difference between what's legal and what's just official looking. That's the whole trick. It always is." Something moved across her face, not relief exactly, more like the cautious recognition that she was not for the first time in several months entirely alone with this. "All right," she said. Then abruptly, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She met his eyes directly. "I expected someone who wanted to keep his head down and his mouth shut and last long enough to move on." "Maybe I did too," Cole said. "When I rode in." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she stood up, smoothed her skirt, and said in a voice that was brisk and almost back to normal, "Supper at 6. You'll eat inside tonight. We've got reading to do after." That evening, after Noah was in bed, and the heat had dropped from unbearable to merely oppressive, Cole and Evelyn spread the contents of the box across the kitchen table and started at the beginning. It took 3 hours. Halfway through, Evelyn found a page she had never looked at closely, a rider attached to the water rights filing from 1881, and she read it twice and set it down and said, "Cole." Her voice had changed. He leaned over to look. His jaw tightened. The rider assigned partial oversight of the Hart water claim to a third party in the event of default, a shell company name he didn't recognize with an address in the territorial capital. The signature beside it was James Hart's, but the date was 3 years before James had actually filed the primary water claim. "James didn't sign this," Evelyn said. Her voice was very quiet. "Are you certain?" "I have 10 years of James's handwriting in this box," she said. "This isn't it." She looked up. "Someone signed his name to this, before we even owned the property, before we existed to them." Her hands were flat on the table and completely steady the way hands go steady when shock reaches a certain depth. "This isn't about our debt, is it?" "No," Cole said. "This was planned." "Yes," he said. "I think it was." She looked at the paper for a long time. Then she said very quietly, the kind of quiet that is the room before a storm rather than the room after one, "Then this is not about saving the ranch anymore." Cole watched her. "This is about proving what they did," she said, "and making them answer for it." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's a harder road." "I know." She raised her eyes to his. "Are you still on it with me?" Cole looked at this woman exhausted, clear-eyed, unbroken, and felt the thing in his chest that he had been holding at careful distance pull one step closer without asking permission. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She almost smiled. "I told you not to yes, ma'am me when I say something admirable." "You told me not to do it when you said something practical," he said. "That was admirable. There's a difference." This time she did smile. Small, quick, and real. She turned back to the papers. They worked until past midnight, and neither one of them suggested stopping first. They had 3 copies made of the forged rider before dawn. Cole rode down the mountain in the dark with the originals wrapped in oilcloth inside his vest against his skin, where they would stay dry if the creek crossing ran high. Evelyn had wanted to come. He had told her no, not because he doubted her nerve. Her nerve was the last thing he doubted, but because someone had to stay on the ranch in case Granger's people came back before he did, and Noah could not be left alone with what was coming. She had not liked it, but she had understood it. He was back before Noah woke up, which meant before 6. He handed Evelyn the copies without a word. She held them for a moment, then put them in 3 separate places. One in the lining of her winter coat in the back of the wardrobe. One beneath the floorboard under the kitchen stove that she'd shown him the night before without any explanation other than, "James built that loose on purpose," and one inside the cover of the family Bible on the shelf above the boy's bed. "If something happens to one," she said, "we still have 2. "Nothing's going to happen," Cole said. She looked at him with the flat, honest eyes of a woman who has already had enough things happen. "You don't know that." "No," he said. "I don't." They left it there. The day that followed was ordinary on the surface, and dangerous underneath the way most bad days are. Cole worked the fencing on the east pasture, while Evelyn drove into Greer Hollow to visit the office of the one attorney in town, a man named Aldous Crane, who was 70 years old and mostly handled wills and property disputes, and had, according to Evelyn, the reputation of being the only man in the county that Silas Granger actively avoided at social functions. That detail mattered. She came back at mid-afternoon with Crane's agreement to review the documents and his observation delivered in the dry tone of a man who has seen many things that a water rights writer, predating the primary deed filing by 3 years, was, quote, a remarkable clerical achievement for a piece of paper that was allegedly signed by a man who did not yet own the land it pertained to. Cole was at the pump washing his hands when she told him this. He stopped. He believes us, he said. He believes the dates, she said. Which is better? Crane doesn't deal in belief. He deals in arithmetic. When can he file? He needs 2 weeks to prepare the challenge properly. He says going in half-ready is worse than not going in at all. We don't have 2 weeks before their accelerated deadline. I know, she said. He knows too. He's filing for an emergency injunction to freeze the foreclosure while the fraud allegation is investigated. She paused. He said if there's any other evidence, any other properties, any other people who were taken the same way, it strengthens everything. Cole was quiet for a moment. I might know where to look for that. She waited. In Canyon City, he said slowly. The man I fought, the one who died, his name was Roy Pinter. He worked for a freight contractor out of the territorial capital. At the time, I thought it was just a barroom fight that went wrong. I've had 5 years to think about it differently. He looked at her. Roy Pinter came at me the night after I'd asked too many questions about a land sale near the pass, a sale that didn't add up. I was dumb and angry, and I swung when I should have walked, and I've carried that every day since. But I always wondered why he came at me so hard over a question. Evelyn was very still. You think Pinter was working for someone? I think it's possible, Cole said. And I think the freight route through this mountain pass, the one Granger wants the water rights for, might be the same route that was being discussed back then. Same scheme, different county, different widow. The silence between them lasted about 4 seconds. Then Evelyn said, Crane needs to know this. Yes, Cole said. He does. She turned toward the house, then stopped. Cole, if that's true, if Granger has been running this for years across multiple counties, what you know about Roy Pinter puts you at the center of it. I know, he said. That makes you dangerous to him. Yes, he said again. It does. She turned back around fully and looked at him with an expression that he could not quite categorize. It had fear in it, and anger, and something else that sat underneath both of those and was quieter and more persistent than either. You knew this when you rode into Greer Hollow. I didn't know it, he said. I felt it. There's a difference. I've had 5 years to feel it without knowing it. When I saw Granger put that paper in your hands in front of the general store, something in me recognized the shape of it. He held her gaze. I'm not saying it was fate or any such thing. I'm saying I've seen this particular shadow before. She studied him for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, And you're still here. Yes, ma'am. Even knowing it might come back at you. Especially knowing that, he said. Because if I ride away from it again, it just happens to someone else. She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice was steady, but just barely. Go wash up properly. Supper's at 6, and I want you at the table. That was the closest she had come to saying anything close to what was building between them, and they both knew it, and neither one of them said so, and that was exactly right. The first direct confrontation came on a Wednesday. Cole was working the water pipe on the north side when he heard the horses, 3 of them coming up the ranch road from the direction of town. He straightened up and watched them come in. Wade Harlan in front, broad and red-faced in the mid-morning heat. Silas Granger beside him, clean-collared and unruffled as ever, as though the temperature did not apply to men of his standing. 2 ranch hands behind whose function in this visit was decorative in the specific way that implied they were there to be counted rather than spoken to. Cole did not move toward the house. He did not move toward them. He stood where he was with the pipe wrench in his hand and waited. Granger dismounted first, which Cole noted. Harlan followed. The two hands stayed mounted, which Cole also noted. "Mr. Mercer," Granger said with the benign pleasantness of a man who has never needed to raise his voice because everything he wants has always been delivered before he finishes asking. "I wonder if Mrs. Hart is available." "I'll let her know you're here," Cole said. He did not go to the house, though, because Evelyn had already come out of it, which meant she had seen them coming too. She crossed the yard with Noah at her heels. She had said twice in the last week that she wanted the boy inside during any confrontation, and twice he had reappeared behind her like a shadow with his own agenda, and she stopped beside Cole and said, "Mr. Granger, Mr. Harlan." "Mrs. Hart." Granger's smile was the kind that involved only the front of the face. "We've come on behalf of the community, really out of genuine concern for you and your boy." "How thoughtful," she said. Harlan cut straight through the pleasantry the way he always did, because subtlety bored him. "We've been hearing things, Evelyn, about this man you've got on the place, about papers being looked at, about lawyers." "I have every right to consult an attorney," she said. "Of course you do," Granger said smoothly. "Of course. No one's suggesting otherwise. We're simply concerned. A widow alone on a mountain property with a man of Mr. Mercer's history living in her barn reviewing private financial documents." He let the implication hang in the air like smoke. Cole felt the thing in his chest kick hard. He kept his hand loose on the wrench. He pressed his tongue against the back of his teeth and kept his face still. Harlan said, "The community has a responsibility to speak up when a woman might not be in the position to make the best choices for herself and her child." "Is that what this is?" Evelyn said. Her voice was as flat and dry as the summer grass. "Community responsibility." "We're worried about the boy," Granger said, and then he looked directly at Noah, which was deliberate, and Cole watched him do it, and felt the temperature behind his own eyes spike. "A child needs proper guidance, Mrs. Hart. Steady, respectable influence. Not—" "That's enough," Cole said. His voice came out quiet. Quieter than he intended, which was somehow worse than loud. Granger looked at him with the patient contempt of a man who has decided what kind of problem someone is and filed them away accordingly. "I beg your pardon. You rode up here talking about community responsibility," Cole said. "You want to say something about me, say it to me. Don't look at the boy while you're saying it." Harlan's expression shifted. "You got a lot of nerve talking to Mr. Granger that way, convict." And there it was, the word thrown like a stone, aimed at the exact place where Cole's self-control had its thinnest wall. He took one step forward. Just one. And then he stopped. Because Noah was standing 3 feet behind him, and the boy's eyes were wide and fixed on Cole's face with an expression that was not fear exactly, but was watching to see what kind of man this was watching, to see whether this was the moment the answer changed. And Cole felt that look like a hand pressed flat against his sternum, holding him exactly where he stood. He breathed out slowly. "You should go," he said to Granger. "Mrs. Hart has nothing more to say to you today. And I'd advise you respectfully to come back with a lawyer of your own next time, because the next conversation about this property is going to be a legal one." Granger studied him for a moment with those still, calculating eyes. Then he smiled the small, certain smile of a man who thinks he knows exactly how this ends. "Good day, Mrs. Hart," he said. They rode back down the mountain. The yard was silent. Noah said from behind Cole in a voice that was working hard at calm, "He looked at me on purpose." "Yes," Cole said. "He wanted to make you mad." "Yes. But you didn't." The boy came around to Cole's side and looked up at him with an expression that was 9 years old and ancient at the same time. "You stopped yourself." "I did," Cole said. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know a person could do that. Stop like that when someone makes them really, really mad." Cole crouched down so he was at eye level with the boy. "You can always stop," he said. "It costs something every time, but you can always stop. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Noah looked at him for a long moment. Then he put his hand briefly on Cole's shoulder, a small, deliberate gesture that was more serious than a hug and more honest than most things adults manage, and went back into the house. Cole stood up. Evelyn was watching him from 2 feet away. She had her arms crossed and her jaw set, and her eyes were very bright in a way that might have been anger at Granger or something else entirely. "You stopped," she said. "Yeah," he said. She uncrossed her arms. "Come inside. We need to write to Crane today, not tomorrow." The second twist arrived that same night, and it came from a direction no one had prepared for. Cole was in the barn, late, going over Dulcie's hoof-healing well 2 more days, and she'd take a shoe again when he heard footsteps that were too light to be Evelyn and too deliberate to be Noah. He turned. It was the marshal. Boone Cutter was a tall man, angular and weather-dry, with a badge that caught no light because it had been worn long enough to lose its shine. He came into the barn alone, which Cole noted immediately, and he stood just inside the door with his hands at his sides in a posture that was not aggressive, but was not entirely comfortable either. "Marshal," Cole said. "Mercer." Cutter looked at Dulcie, then back at Cole. "You're good with horses." "I get by." "Heard you got into it with Harlan and Granger today." "Heard wrong," Cole said. "They rode up and I asked them to leave. Nobody got into anything." Cutter studied him. "Granger filed a complaint this afternoon. Says you made a threatening gesture toward him. Says he's got 2 witnesses." Cole felt the floor of the situation drop 2 feet without warning. He kept his face still. "What kind of complaint?" "The kind that gives me cause to bring you in for questioning at minimum." Cutter's voice was careful and even and unreadable. "And potentially to hold you pending a hearing." The thing in Cole's chest went very cold. "His 2 witnesses," Cole said. "Were they the 2 hands he brought up here that sat on their horses and didn't say 10 words the entire time?" Cutter said nothing. "Because there are 2 other witnesses," Cole said. "Mrs. Hart, and her son, who is 9 years old and remembers things exactly as they happened because children do not yet know how to edit." Cutter looked at his hat brim for a moment. Then he said very quietly, as if the barn itself shouldn't hear it, "Mercer, I'm going to come back here at 7 tomorrow morning, and I'm going to need to take you in. That's my job, and I'm going to do it." He paused. "But I'll tell you something that's not my job to tell you. The complaint was filed within 2 hours of Granger's visit here. That's fast. That's the kind of fast that means the complaint was written before the visit happened." Cole looked at him. Cutter held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then he put his hat back on and said, 7 o'clock, and walked out of the barn. Cole stood in the quiet for a long moment. Then he went to the house. Evelyn was at the kitchen table when he came in. She read his face before he said a single word, and she was on her feet by the time he reached the doorway. "What happened?" she said. Not a question. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about her that he had come to understand was not coldness, but the opposite. She listened the way people listen when they are determined to get every word right so they can use it. When he finished, she said, "The complaint was pre-written. That's what Cutter implied." "Which means today's visit wasn't intimidation," she said. "It was staging. Granger came up here to manufacture a reason to have you removed." She pressed her fingers flat on the table. "He knows we've been looking at the documents. He knows we've talked to Crane. And he knows that as long as you're on this property, I'm not doing this alone." "Evelyn, I'm not finished." Her voice was tight and precise. "He is going to arrest you tomorrow morning, and he is going to hold you as long as he legally can, and in the meantime, he is going to make another move on the ranch. That is what is going to happen if we don't move first." "I'm not running," Cole said. She looked at him sharply. "I didn't say run." "Then what?" She pulled out the chair across from her and sat, and she looked at him with those dark, clear eyes that never flinched from the shape of a thing. "You're going to go with Cutter tomorrow morning," she said. "Peacefully, without argument. You're going to go in front of Noah if that's how it happens. And you're going to be calm, and you're going to trust me." "Trust you to what?" he said. "To finish this," she said. "Because Granger is expecting me to fall apart when they take you. He's counting on it. That's the whole calculation." She leaned forward slightly. "And I need you to believe that I won't." Cole looked at her for a long time. He thought about the woman who had hired him at a wagon in front of a general store against every piece of advice she had ever been given. He thought about 3 copies of evidence in 3 separate hiding places. He thought about an old lawyer who dealt in arithmetic. He thought about a 9-year-old boy who had put his hand on his shoulder like a benediction. "I believe you," he said. She held his gaze. Then she said, "You should know something. Before tomorrow." "All right." Her voice dropped in register, not to a whisper, but to the particular tone people use when they stop choosing words carefully and just say the thing. "When you stepped forward at Granger today and then stopped yourself, I have watched men lose their temper my entire life. My father, men in town, James, God rest him, had a temper he wrestled with every year. I have never once, not in my entire life, watched a man stop the way you stopped." She met his eyes. "I don't know what that cost you, but I saw it, and Noah saw it, and I want you to know it was not nothing." The kitchen was very quiet. Cole said after a moment, "It cost less than it used to." She held his gaze one moment longer, then she straightened and said in the brisk, practical tone that meant she was protecting herself from the thing she'd just said, "Sleep. You'll need a clear head in the morning." He stood at the door. "Evelyn, whatever happens tomorrow, the copies are safe. 3 places. Crane has the timeline. And the name Roy Pinter is in a letter I've already written and sealed and left with the oilcloth in the barn." He paused. "If something goes wrong, you'll know what it means." She looked at him steadily. "Nothing's going to go wrong," she said, "because we're not done yet." He left her there at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood and her chin level and her eyes bright and certain. And he went to the barn and he lay down on his bedroll in the dark and he stared at the ceiling. And he thought about the way a 9-year-old boy had looked at him and called it courage. He did not sleep well, but he slept. And at 7 o'clock the next morning, when Marshal Boone Cutter rode up the ranch road with his deputy and a second horse, Cole Mercer was standing in the yard with his hat on and his hands open and his face as still as mountain water, ready to be taken in. Noah was watching from the porch. Cole looked at the boy once. "Steady," he said with his eyes. "Steady." Noah straightened his spine. Evelyn stood in the doorway with her arms at her sides and her jaw set, and she watched Cole mount the second horse, and she did not flinch, not once. Not even when the marshal turned his horse toward town, and Cole followed, and the sound of the hooves on the dry summer road faded into the distance and left the ranch quiet as a held breath. Then she turned to her son. "Get your boots on," she said. "We've got work to do." Evelyn Hart did not cry after the horses disappeared down the road. She had learned in the 8 months since James died that crying was a thing you did when you had time for it. And time was the one resource she could not afford to waste this morning. She pulled Noah's boots from under the bench by the door, handed them to him without a word, and while he wrestled them on, she went to the kitchen and retrieved the letter Crane had sent back with his preliminary notes, 3 pages of close, careful handwriting in the margins of the copies she had sent him, every note precise, every observation dated. She folded it into her coat pocket alongside the original forged rider, and stood for a moment with her hand pressed flat against her own chest, feeling the paper there. Then she said, "Noah, I need you to think very carefully. Is there anything at all you saw or heard when Granger's men came to the ranch, not just yesterday? Any time, any visit, anything that seemed strange or wrong, even if you didn't know why?" Noah had his boots on now. He was sitting up very straight on the bench with the expression he wore when he was treating a question with the seriousness he believed it deserved. He was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said, "The clerk, Pell, when he came with the papers. What about him? He came on a Sunday." Evelyn went still. "What?" "He came the Sunday before he came official," Noah said. "I saw him from the hayloft. He rode up slow and stopped at the edge of the property and looked at everything for a long time. He had a notebook. He was writing in it. Noah looked at her steadily. "I didn't tell you because I didn't know it was important. I thought maybe he was just lost." Evelyn stared at her son, a bank clerk conducting a property assessment on a Sunday. Unofficially. With a notebook, before the official visit, before the accelerated foreclosure notice was served. That was not procedure. That was preparation. "Noah," she said carefully, "if someone asked you to say exactly what you saw in a room in front of people, could you do that?" He straightened further. "Yes, ma'am." She kissed the top of his head, grabbed her coat, and said, "Come on, we're going to see Mr. Crane." The ride to Greer Hollow was the longest 12 miles of Evelyn's life, and she had ridden that road in a February ice storm, the year James had the fever. She kept the horse moving at a pace that was slightly faster than comfortable, and she kept her eyes on the road, and she kept herself from thinking about Cole in a jail cell, by thinking instead about every single piece of paper she had in her coat, and every single thing Crane had written in the margins, and every single word Noah had just told her, assembling it in her head, in the order it would need to be presented. She was so focused on this that she almost missed the thing that would change everything. She caught it from the corner of her eye. On the left side of the road, where the old Miller property sat abandoned behind its broken fence, a freight crate. Sitting outside the collapsed shed. Recent. The wood was still pale unweathered, and stenciled on the side in black paint was a company name she had seen once before in the documents she and Cole had spread across the kitchen table 3 nights ago. She pulled the horse up so hard, he protested. Noah said, "Mama." She was already off the horse. The crate was empty. But the stenciling was clear. Territorial Freight Consolidated, with an address in the capital. The same shell company name attached to the forged water rights rider. The same company Cole had said was connected to the freight route through the mountain pass. "Noah," she said, keeping her voice even, "do you see the name on this crate?" He read it aloud. "Do you remember that name from anywhere?" he thought. Then his eyes went very wide. "That's the name on the paper under the kitchen stove," he said. "The one in the copy. I read it when you weren't looking. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said. "You just became our second witness to something." She looked at the crate for another 3 seconds. Then she went back to the horse and kept riding faster than before. Crane's office was on the 2nd floor above the assay office, and when Evelyn came up the stairs with Noah behind her, the old lawyer was already at his desk, which meant he had already been working for hours, which meant he was already worried. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her face. Then he set down his pen. "Tell me," he said. She told him everything. The Sunday assessment, the freight crate, Noah's testimony, the connection between Territorial Freight Consolidated and the forged rider. And then, because there was no reason not to, she told him what Cole had told her about Roy Pinter, the man who had died in Canyon City and the land near the pass, and the question that had cost Cole 5 years of his life. Crane listened without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and produced a file she had not seen before. He set it on the desk between them and said, "Mrs. Hart, I have been practicing law in this county for 41 years. In that time, I have encountered Silas Granger's methods on 4 separate occasions involving 4 separate properties." He placed his hand flat on the file. "I was never able to prove it. The paperwork was always just inside the line of arguable. The witnesses were always just unreliable enough." He looked at her. "What you have brought me this morning moves this from arguable to provable. And what your son saw a Sunday assessment conducted before the official notice that is not arguable at all. That is fraud. Documented, witnessed, and datable." Evelyn said, "Can you get Cole out?" "The complaint Granger filed is paper thin," Crane said. "A threatening gesture with no physical contact witnessed by 2 men on his own payroll. Against that I can put Mrs. Hart and a 9-year-old boy, who from what I can observe is not the kind of child who embellishes." He glanced at Noah. Noah looked back at him with perfect seriousness. Crane almost smiled. I can have him out by afternoon if the marshal is willing to be reasonable. And if the marshal isn't willing to be reasonable, Evelyn said. Then we go above this marshal, Crane said simply. He picked up his pen. I need you to write down everything in order with dates where you have them. I need the boy to do the same in his own words without coaching. I'm going to send a rider to Judge Whitmore. He is currently fishing at Carver Creek, which is 8 miles east of here, and I have his location because I made it my business to know it a week ago when I first saw what Granger was building. He paused. Mrs. Hart, I want you to understand something. What we are doing today is not a long shot. It is not a gamble. It is arithmetic. And the numbers are on your side. She felt something loosen in her chest that had been wound tight since 7 o'clock that morning. Right, she said to Noah. Yes, ma'am, he said, and Crane gave him paper, and the boy bent over it with his tongue between his teeth and wrote with the focused determination of someone who knows that the words matter. In the jail, Cole had been given a cell that was hot and small and smelled of old wood and existing misery, which was an improvement over where he had spent the last 5 years, but not by as much as it should have been. He sat on the bench with his back against the wall and his elbows on his knees, and he waited because waiting was what this required, and he had become through the most painful possible education a man who could wait. Granger came at noon. He came alone, which told Cole something. He stood on the other side of the bars in his clean vest and his patient expression, and he looked at Cole the way a man looks at a problem he has decided to resolve efficiently. I'll make this simple, Granger said. You're a convicted man in my county's jail on a valid complaint. I have 2 witnesses. The hearing won't happen for 3 weeks, which means you sit here 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, the Hart property goes to the bank under the accelerated notice. Mrs. Hart takes her boy and whatever she can carry. He paused. Or you leave. Tonight. Quietly. The complaint disappears. The foreclosure gets extended 6 months, which gives Mrs. Hart time to make arrangements. No one loses more than they have to. Cole looked at him. You're offering me a deal that protects her, Cole said. I'm offering you an exit, Granger said, which is what men like you need. You don't belong in this county. You don't belong in that woman's life. You are a disruption to a process that was already in motion before you arrived, and your presence has made everything harder than it needed to be for everyone, including her. Including you, Cole said. Granger's expression did not change. Including me. He agreed without embarrassment because he was not a man who embarrassed easily. Leave tonight and she gets 6 months. Stay and she gets nothing. That is the arithmetic. Cole thought about Crane. He thought about the copies in 3 separate places. He thought about Evelyn's hands flat on the kitchen table and her voice saying, "Trust me." "No," he said. Granger looked at him for a long moment. "You're making a mistake." "I've made bigger ones," Cole said. "I'm still here." Granger left. Cole sat back against the wall and breathed slow and careful, and did not let himself think about what would happen if he was wrong. The twist that broke the case open came from the direction of the jail itself, and it came in the form of Marshal Boone Cutter unlocking Cole's cell door at 2:30 in the afternoon. Cole looked up. Cutter said, "You're out." "On what basis?" Cole said carefully. "On the basis that Aldous Crane is downstairs with a retired circuit judge, 3 affidavits a Sunday, dated notebook entry from a bank clerk who apparently didn't know the property had a hayloft, and a 9-year-old boy who just recited the name Territorial Freight Consolidated from memory and explained where he'd seen it." Cutter paused. "And on the further basis that when I laid Granger's complaint against what Crane put in front of me, I realized the complaint was dated 2 hours before the incident it was describing." His jaw tightened. "Which means it was filed before Granger rode up to that ranch yesterday morning." Cole went very still. "He predated it." "The clerk who filed it didn't look at the timestamp," Cutter said. "I did, an hour ago." He opened the cell door fully. "Mercer, I want you to know that I have not been a dishonest man. I have been a man who deferred to power when I should have deferred to evidence. That is a different failure, but it is still a failure." Cole stood up. "Are you arresting Granger?" "I am writing to Judge Whitmore with everything Crane has assembled," Cutter said, "and I am letting the law decide what happens next, which is what I should have done before I let a pre-written complaint walk through my door." He held out Cole's hat and gun belt. "Your horse is at the rail." Cole took them. He put his hat on and buckled the belt, and he said, "Marshal, the name Roy Pinter. Look into the circumstances of his employment in 1883, and look at who contracted Territorial Freight Consolidated that same year. What you find is going to be relevant." Cutter looked at him steadily. "I'll look." Cole went downstairs. Crane was in the marshal's front room, a small spare man with white hair and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, surrounded by papers arranged with the precision of a man who believes in the moral weight of documents. Beside him was Noah, sitting on a bench with his boots swinging and an expression of exhausted, satisfied importance. And beside Noah was Evelyn. She looked at Cole when he came through the door. She did not move toward him, and he did not move toward her, because there were people in the room, and they were both people who kept the private things private. But she held his eyes for a long moment, and what passed between them in that moment was more than most people say out loud in a lifetime. Then she said, "Mr. Crane needs us both to sign the consolidated affidavit before 4 o'clock." "All right," Cole said. "And Noah has already signed his," she added, "in handwriting that Mr. Crane described as surprisingly legible for a 9-year-old. "It's very legible," Noah said seriously from the bench. Cole looked at the boy. The tightness in his chest that had been there since 7 that morning released so suddenly and completely that he had to press his hand briefly to the doorframe to stay steady. "Good work," he said. Noah looked at him with those ancient clear eyes. "I told you I could do it," he said. They signed the affidavit. Crane sent his rider to Judge Whitmore with everything. Cutter rode out 20 minutes later with his deputy and a copy of the predated complaint in his saddlebag as evidence of its own fraud. It was 3:30 in the afternoon, and the worst of the summer heat was still pressing down on Greer Hollow, and Evelyn was standing on the plank sidewalk outside Crane's office, with Noah beside her and Cole one step back, and she was looking at the bank across the street where Silas Granger's clean-lettered sign caught the afternoon light. "It's not over," she said quietly. Not to anyone in particular. To herself, the way you say things when you need to hear them out loud. "No," Cole said. "But it's turning." She turned to look at him. "He's going to know by tonight that the complaint failed. He's going to know Cutter is moving against him. He is going to do something." "Yes," Cole said. "He is. What do we do?" Cole looked at the bank, then back at her. "We go home," he said. "We secure the property. We make sure the copies are where they are, and we send one more letter tonight to the Territorial Marshal's office in the capital. Crane will draft it. We don't let Granger control the pace of this anymore." He paused. "And we make sure we're together when the next move comes, because separated is where he beats us." She held his gaze. "Separated," she repeated quietly. "Is that what this morning was? Him separating us?" "That's what this morning was," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said so low that only he could hear it, "I did not know how much I was counting on you being there until you weren't." The words landed in Cole's chest and stayed there. He did not answer right away, because there was no casual answer to something like that, and he refused to give her one. He said finally, "I'm here now." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she straightened and said louder, "Noah, horse?" And she moved toward the hitching rail with the brisk, forward-leaning stride of a woman who has decided that the next thing to do is the next thing. Noah fell in beside Cole as they walked. "Cole," he said at a volume just above a whisper. "Yeah." "When Mama said she didn't know how much she was counting on you." He paused. "She said the same thing about the ranch after Papa died. That she didn't know how much she'd been counting on someone until they were gone." He looked up at Cole with the devastating simplicity of a child who has not yet learned to complicate the obvious. "She doesn't say that about things that don't matter." Cole looked at this boy for a long moment. "Go get your horse," he said. Noah went. Cole followed Evelyn to the rail and untied his horse, and they rode out of Greer Hollow in the long amber light of mid-afternoon, the three of them, and behind them, the town watched from its windows and doorways, the way towns always watch the thing they do not yet understand. They were 3 miles from the ranch when Noah, riding slightly ahead, pulled up short. Cole and Evelyn came up on either side of him and looked where he was looking. There was smoke. Not a lot. A thin thread of it rising from the direction of the Hart property against the pale summer sky. Not the black rolling smoke of catastrophe, more like the small, deliberate smoke of something specific burning. Evelyn said in a voice completely empty of any feeling at all, "The barn." Cole was already moving. He put his horse into a full run and covered the remaining 3 miles in a way that removed all possibility of thought, running on instinct and the particular cold fury of a man who has seen enough things taken from people who couldn't afford to lose them. He came over the last rise and saw it. Not the barn, not yet. The barn was standing, but the horse shed, the leaning one. The one he had been meaning to shore up for 2 weeks, fully alight on the east side, and a figure on horseback disappearing into the tree line at the north edge of the property. He did not chase the figure. He went for the horses. Dulcie was in the shed. He got to the door before the fire reached the beam above it, and he went in low under the smoke, and he found Dulcie wild-eyed and screaming against her tether. And he cut it with one clean stroke, and got her moving, and got himself out in 30 seconds with the horse and his lungs burning and his vest smoking along the left shoulder. He led Dulcie to the water trough and stood with her while she shook. Evelyn arrived at a dead run with Noah behind her. She saw the shed, saw Cole, saw Dulcie, and did the accounting in her eyes in about 2 seconds flat. "Is she hurt?" Evelyn said. "Scared," Cole said. "Not hurt." "Anyone else in there?" "No, I checked." She looked at the shed, which was burning itself down to a safe perimeter of ash on the east side. The structure was going, but the fire would not spread. Then she looked at Cole. Her eyes went to his vest, the smoking edge of it. She reached out and pressed her hand flat against it, checking with her palm for heat underneath, and she held it there for a moment longer than the task required, and Cole stood very still and let her. "You went in there," she said. "Dulcie was in there," he said. "You went in there." She said again, and the second time, "It was not about the horse." Cole looked at her hand on his chest, and then at her face. "I'm fine," he said. "I know you're fine," she said, and her voice was doing something complicated that she was working hard to keep contained. "That's not... I know you're fine." She took her hand back, pressed it against her own side. The figure in the tree line. Harlan's men, or someone Granger hired. "One person," Cole said. "Single horse moving fast, not confident, not professional. Someone who was told to make a point and got frightened doing it." "A message," she said. "Yes." "He's rattled," she said. "He wouldn't risk arson if he wasn't rattled." "No," Cole said. "He wouldn't." She looked at the dying shed. Then she said with the voice of someone who has burned through the last of their patience for being targeted and is now entirely done with that particular feeling. "Write the letter to the territorial marshal tonight. Everything. Names, dates, the forged writer, the predated complaint, the Sunday assessment, the fire. All of it. Tonight." "I'll start as soon as the mare's settled," Cole said. She nodded. Then she looked at him one more time, the singed vest, the steady hands, the face that had not changed in the time since she'd known him, except to become more familiar than she had planned for, and she said quietly enough that it went no further than the two of them. "I am glad you didn't leave this morning when he offered you the deal." Cole looked at her sharply. "How do you know about that?" "Because I know Silas Granger," she said. "And I know that a man like that, when he's cornered, always tries the clean exit first." She held his gaze. "I know you said no." "You couldn't have known I'd say no," he said. "Yes, I could," she said. She turned and walked to where Noah was standing with Dulcie, and she put her hand on the horse's nose and spoke quietly to her son. And Cole stood in the yard in the amber dying light of the summer afternoon, with the smell of smoke on his clothes, and the letter he was going to write already forming in his mind. Sentence by sentence, clean and precise, and absolutely damning. And he understood clearly, and without any sentiment clouding it, that Silas Granger had made the last in a long series of mistakes. He had underestimated what a man will do when he finally has something worth staying for. The letter went out before midnight. Cole wrote it by lamplight at the kitchen table while Evelyn sat across from him reading through Crane's notes for the 4th time, not because she hadn't memorized them already, but because reading gave her hands something to do. Noah had fallen asleep in his chair at 10 o'clock with his head on his folded arms, and neither of them had moved him, and the lamp threw a warm circle over all 3 of them, that felt in the particular way of things you only recognize when they're almost gone, like something worth fighting for. Cole wrote slowly and precisely. No emotion in the language. Only facts, dates, names, and a clean accounting of cause and effect that would mean something to a territorial marshal who had never met any of them and had no reason to care unless the paper in front of him made caring unavoidable. When he finished, he read it back to himself once. Then he slid it across the table to Evelyn. She read it without speaking. When she reached the last line, she set it down and said, "This is enough." "It should be," he said. "It is," she said. Not a question. A decision. She folded it, sealed it, and wrote the address on the outside, in her own hand, which was cleaner than his. Then she stood up and carried Noah to his bed with the practiced ease of a woman who had been doing it alone for 8 months, and when she came back to the kitchen, she blew out the lamp and said good night and went to her room, and Cole went to the barn, and the ranch settled into its nighttime sounds around them. He did not sleep much. But that was all right. He had stopped needing much sleep somewhere around the 2nd year in Canyon City, and he had never entirely gotten the habit back. The rider went to the territorial capital at dawn. Crane sent him personally a young man named Ferris, who rode for the old lawyer on a retainer basis, and who was, according to Crane, fast enough and discreet enough and sufficiently unimpressed by Silas Granger's social standing to be trusted with something this consequential. He left before the town was properly awake. Cole watched him go from the edge of the property line and then turned back to the ranch and the ordinary work of a summer morning. Because the work did not stop for the slow machinery of justice, and the cattle still needed water and the horses still needed feed, and the east fence still had 2 posts that were leaning hard enough to go over in a strong wind. The response came in 4 days, not from the capital, from Judge Whitmore directly. He rode up to Crane's office on a Thursday morning with 2 men from the Territorial Marshal's Service and a document that Crane read standing in the street and then carried inside without a word to anyone. Cole was in town for feed when it happened. He saw Cutter come out of his office and stand on the sidewalk watching the judge's party with an expression that had changed significantly from the one he'd worn a week ago. Less deferential, more alert. The expression of a man who has recently remembered what his badge was supposed to mean. Cole went into Crane's office. Crane looked up from the document. "Sit down," he said. Cole sat. "The Territorial Marshal's office received your letter," Crane said. They had already been watching Territorial Freight Consolidated for an unrelated matter, a freight licensing dispute in the next county. Your letter connected 3 things they had been unable to connect. He set the document down. Mercer. The name Roy Pinter. His employment in 1883. They knew it. They had it in a file that was open and going nowhere because no one could explain the motive for a saloon fight that resulted in a death. He paused. "You just explained it." Cole was very still. "What are they going to do?" "They are going to conduct a formal inquiry," Crane said, "beginning with Granger's financial records, which Judge Whitmore has just issued a warrant to examine. Beginning with the deed records for every property transaction in this county in the last 12 years that involved Territorial Freight Consolidated. Beginning with the forged rider on Mrs. Hart's water rights." He leaned forward. "And they are going to do it publicly, Because Judge Whitmore, who has been on the bench in this territory for 23 years and does not enjoy being deceived in his own county, has decided that the inquiry will open in the Greer Hollow courthouse. This Friday, day after tomorrow. Cole said nothing. It will be public, Crane said again. The whole town. Does Granger know? He will before noon, Crane said. The warrant is being served this morning. Cole stood up. Mercer, Crane said. The territorial investigators also noted something about the Roy Pinter case. The records from Canyon City indicate that the manslaughter conviction carried a recommendation for early review that was never acted on. Given the new information regarding Pinter's employment and the potential premeditated nature of his provocation, Crane chose his next words carefully. There is a possibility that your conviction will be reviewed. The room was very quiet. Cole stood with his hat in his hands, and he did not let himself feel the full weight of what that meant. Not yet. Because feeling it now would cost him the steadiness he needed for the next 48 hours. First things first, he said. Yes, Crane said. First things first. Cole went to find Evelyn. She was at the dry goods, and when he told her, she stood in the middle of the store with her basket in her hand and her face doing something complicated and private. And Mrs. Castor watched from behind the counter with an expression that had shifted considerably from the loud Christian concern of 2 weeks ago. Evelyn said quietly, Friday. Day after tomorrow. She breathed out slowly through her nose. He's going to come at us between now and then. Yes, Cole said. He is. What does he have left? Intimidation, Cole said. Or flight. Those are his two options now. He won't flee, she said immediately. Men like Granger don't flee. They believe they can still control the narrative. I know, Cole said. That's why we stay close to the ranch tonight and tomorrow, both of us. She looked at him. Then she put her basket on the counter and said to Mrs. Castor with complete even-handedness, I'll take my usual order, please. And if you happen to hear anything useful between now and Friday, Margaret, I would not be opposed to knowing it. Mrs. Castor blinked. Then surprisingly she said, Harlan's been at the bank every day this week. Door closed. Long meetings. Evelyn nodded once. Thank you, she said. That was Thursday. What Granger did was not what Cole had expected, and that was the thing about a man who had built his entire life inside the appearance of respectability. When he finally broke, he broke in the direction of the thing he'd always been underneath. He came to the ranch himself, alone. No Harlan, no hands. Just Silas Granger, on a dark horse in the dry Thursday evening heat, riding up the road with no pretense of civility left in him. Cole saw him from the barn and walked out to the middle of the yard and stood there. Granger dismounted. He did not bother with pleasantries. You have destroyed something it took me 20 years to build, he said. His voice was still controlled, but the control was structural now, not natural the way a dam sounds when the water is right at the edge. You built it on forged paper and dead men's signatures, Cole said. That's not something. That's a lie waiting for someone to read it carefully. You were nobody, Granger said, and his voice cracked on the second word in a way that exposed everything underneath it. You were a convict with $3 in your pocket and no prospects in any county in this territory. You could have taken the deal. You could have ridden away, and it would have been over. Over for you, Cole said. Not for her. Granger looked at him with something close to genuine incomprehension, the look of a man who has operated so long in a world where everyone has a price that he cannot process the existence of something that does not. What are you to her? He said. What are you to any of this? You've been here 6 weeks. Long enough, Cole said. Long enough, Granger repeated. He shook his head. You are going to stand there and tell me that you blew up everything, your exit, your safety, your freedom for a widow you met over a broken wagon axle. Yes, Cole said. A beat. Then, why? It was the first honest question Granger had asked since he'd ridden onto the property, and Cole answered it honestly. "Because she didn't look at me and see what everyone else saw," he said. "She looked at me and saw whether I could fix what needed fixing, and then she hired me anyway." He held Granger's eyes. "A man doesn't walk away from that. Not if he's got anything left in him worth keeping." Granger stared at him. Then the door of the house opened, and Evelyn came out onto the porch with Noah behind her and a shotgun in her hands held at a downward angle that was neither threatening nor ambiguous. "Mr. Granger," she said, "you're trespassing." He looked at her. Something moved across his face. Not remorse. Men like Granger did not do remorse, but the recognition of a kind of defeat he had not prepared for. The kind that does not come from a faster gun or a smarter lawyer. The kind that comes from being wrong about what people are made of. "You'll lose the civil suit," he said to her, "even if the criminal inquiry goes forward. These things take years and you don't have the resources." "I have Aldous Crane," she said, "and I have time, and I have a lot more patience than you've credited me for." She tilted her head slightly. "Ride back down the mountain, Mr. Granger. I'll see you Friday in the courthouse." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he mounted his horse and rode away. Noah watched him go from the porch step. Then he said, "He's scared." "Yes," Evelyn said. "Good," Noah said with the simple, clean satisfaction of a 9-year-old who has been frightened for 6 months and has decided he is finished with it. Evelyn looked at Cole across the yard. Cole looked back at her. The shotgun was still in her hands, and the evening was pressing down golden and hot around them, and neither of them said anything, because what needed saying had already been said in the way they were looking at each other, and some things don't need words to be permanent. Friday came in hard and bright. Half of Greer Hollow turned out for the public inquiry, which was more than Judge Whitmore had anticipated, and exactly as many as Aldous Crane had planned for. The courthouse held 50 people comfortably, and there were 70 in it by 9 in the morning, which meant the overflow stood in the street outside the open windows and listened, and the sound of what was happening inside moved through them in waves. Cole sat beside Evelyn at the front with Noah on her other side. Crane was at the table to their left, with his documents arranged with the moral authority of a man who has been waiting 20 years for arithmetic to matter in this county. Granger sat across the room with his own attorney, a man from the capital who had arrived yesterday with a fine suit and an expression that had been visibly deteriorating since he'd had a chance to review the opposing evidence. Judge Whitmore opened proceedings at 9:15 without preamble. The first document presented was the forged rider. Crane walked through the dates, the rider predating the deed. By 3 years, the impossibility of James Hart's signature on a document he could not legally have signed, the handwriting comparison, prepared by a document examiner Crane had sent for from Denver. Granger's attorney objected twice. Both objections were overruled in the tone of a man who does not enjoy having his time wasted. The second document was the predated complaint. Cutter himself presented it, stood up in front of the whole town, and stated plainly that the complaint filed against Cole Mercer had been time-stamped 2 hours before the incident. It described, which meant it had been written in advance, which meant the visit to the Hart Ranch had been a performance designed to manufacture cause for arrest. He said it without looking at Granger, and without apology, in the voice of a man who is paying a debt he's uncomfortable having accumulated. The room shifted. Cole felt it, the particular movement of a group of people who have been holding a story in their heads and are now being asked to replace it with a different one. Some resisted. Some were already there. Margaret Castor, 2 rows back, had gone very still. Wade Harlan, seated near the wall, stood up at the midpoint of proceedings and said loudly that this was a conspiracy against a man who had built this community, and that a convict's word and a widow's paperwork were not grounds to destroy 20 years of reputation. Judge Whitmore looked at him over his glasses and said in the voice of a man who has not once in 23 years lost control of a courtroom, "Sit down, Mr. Harlan, or I will have you removed, and you will hear the rest of this through a window." Harlan sat. Noah beside Evelyn exhaled with great feeling. The third witness was Noah himself, Crane had debated it. Evelyn had been the one to say yes because she knew her son, and she knew what he had seen, and she knew better than anyone in the room that a 9-year-old stating a simple observable fact in plain language was worth more than 10 adults parsing legal argument. Noah walked to the front of the room and stood before the judge with his hands at his sides and his chin level, and he stated clearly and without embellishment that he had seen a man from the bank conducting a property survey on a Sunday, writing in a notebook before any official notice had been served. He gave the date. He gave the time. He described the notebook. The room was completely silent. Then the twist that broke the dam entirely came from the last direction anyone expected. The door at the back of the courthouse opened. A young man walked in, pale sweating in a clerk's collar that was wilted with heat and what appeared to be several days of moral crisis. He stopped inside the door and looked at Judge Whitmore and said in a voice that was barely holding together, "I need to make a statement." It was Pell, the bank clerk. Cole felt Evelyn's hand close briefly on his forearm and then release. Pell walked to the front of the room. He did not look at Granger. He stood before the judge and he said that he had conducted the Sunday assessment himself on Granger's instruction, that he had been told it was routine, that when he had asked why it needed to happen on a Sunday, without the owner's knowledge, he had been told that some procedural matters were better handled quietly. He said that he had recorded everything in his notebook. He said that he still had the notebook. He said that he had not slept properly since the day he had served the accelerated foreclosure notice to Mrs. Hart, and that watching a 9-year-old boy try to act brave while his mother read a document designed to take everything from her had been the thing that had undone him, and he was done being undone quietly. He put the notebook on the judge's table. Granger's attorney leaned over and said something to his client. Granger did not respond. He was sitting very still with his hands flat on the table in front of him, and his face had the quality of a man watching a structure he spent his whole life building go down one support at a time, too fast to stop, too complete to survive. Judge Whitmore read 3 pages of the notebook. Then he looked up and said, "I've seen enough." The injunction against the Hart foreclosure was issued on the spot. The criminal inquiry was formally opened against Silas Granger for fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy. The 2 territorial investigators who had ridden in with the judge moved toward Granger's table, and the attorney from the Capitol stood and gathered his papers, with the efficient detachment of a man who knows when a case is no longer worth his reputation. Granger stood. He looked across the room at Cole. Just for a moment. The look was not rage. It was something smaller and more honest than rage. The look of a man who has finally run out of the story he told about himself and doesn't know what's underneath it. Cole held his gaze and said nothing. There was nothing to say. The arithmetic had been done. They took Granger out through the side door. The courtroom exhaled. Then the room began to talk all at once in the particular way rooms talk, when something they thought was solid turns out to have been hollow all along. Cole heard his own name in it, and Evelyn's, and the word fraud, and the word forgery, and the word widow, and he stopped listening to the specifics, because the specifics no longer required his attention. He looked at Evelyn. She was sitting very straight in her chair with her hands folded on the table, and her eyes bright, and her jaw set. And she looked in this moment exactly like what she was, a woman who had bet everything on the right thing, and been right, and knew it, and was not going to make a performance of knowing it. Then Noah climbed over her and into Cole's lap, which he had never done before, and wrapped both arms around Cole's neck and held on. And Cole put one hand on the boy's back and held him just as steady, and that was that. Crane appeared at Cole's shoulder a few minutes later. He leaned down and said quietly, "The Territorial Marshal's office has sent formal notification to the court in Canyon City regarding the Roy Pinter case. Given the evidence of Pinter's employment and the deliberate provocation he undertook on Granger's behalf, the original conviction is being reviewed." He paused. "I cannot promise the outcome, but I want you to know the door is open." Cole looked at him. "Thank you, Aldous." It was the first time he had used the old man's given name. Crane looked faintly surprised, and then faintly pleased, and went back to his documents. People came over in the following hour. Not everyone. Some of the town filed out without meeting anyone's eyes, and those were the ones who had the most to reckon with, and would reckon with it on their own time, or not at all. But others came. The woman who ran the boarding house, the doctor who had treated Evelyn through the winter, 3 ranchers from the east side of the valley, who had watched Granger's methods with their own properties and said nothing for too long and knew it. Margaret Castor came last. She stood in front of Evelyn, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I was unkind to you in the store. I said things in front of people that I said because I was afraid, and I dressed it up as concern. I'd like to apologize." Evelyn looked at her. "I accept," she said. Not warmly, but genuinely, which was more than Castor had probably expected, and less than she deserved to be let off with, and both women understood that perfectly. Castor looked at Cole. "You too," she said. "All right," Cole said. She left. Noah watched her go. "She didn't say what she was apologizing for," he said. "She knew," Evelyn said. That was enough. They rode home in the long, late afternoon light of a summer that was just beginning to think about letting go. The heat was still heavy, but there was something in the quality of it, some slight loosening, that said the worst of the season had broken. Cole rode to the left of the wagon the way he always did, and Noah drove, because Evelyn had let him take the reins on the flat stretch, and the road home was 12 miles of ordinary late summer country that had never in Cole's life looked the way it looked right now. When they reached the ranch, Noah pulled the wagon up by the house and jumped down, and then stood with his hand on the mule's nose and looked at Cole with an expression that had been building for several miles. "Are you staying?" he asked. The question landed exactly the way it always lands when someone asks the thing they have most needed to ask and have been afraid of the answer. Cole dismounted. He held his horse's reins in both hands and looked at this boy, this clear-eyed, horse-mad, ancient-souled boy, who had written his own affidavit in legible handwriting and put his hand on a man's shoulder like a benediction and asked the right question every single time. He looked at Evelyn. She was standing on the porch step. She had her arms at her sides and her chin level, and she was looking at him with the direct, unguarded honesty that she only allowed herself when she had decided a thing was real enough to stop protecting herself from it. She said, "You built this place back up from the edge. You went into a burning shed for my horse. You went to jail quietly so I could finish what needed finishing." She paused. "And you stayed every time he gave you a reason to go." She held his eyes. "I know what I'm asking when I ask you to stay. I'm not asking for a hired hand. I'm not asking for the season." Another pause. "I'm asking if you can bear the word home. Because this me and Noah, and this piece of difficult, underpaid, beautiful mountain land, this is what home looks like from here." Cole stood in the yard with the dust on his boots, and the last of the summer sun on his back, and he looked at the woman on the step, and the boy by the mule and the ranch that had been dying when he arrived, and was not dying anymore, and he felt the thing he had been holding at careful distance for 6 weeks. Stop being careful, and simply arrive full and quiet and permanent the way the best things do. "Yes," he said. Noah made a sound that he would have been embarrassed by if he'd been 2 years older and grabbed Dulcie's empty feed bucket and went to fill it, and the way he walked upright and quick and certain was the walk of a boy who had just had the floor put back under his feet and knew it would hold. Evelyn came down off the porch step and stood in front of Cole and looked at him at close range with those dark, clear eyes, and she said quietly, "You came into this town with $3 and a past, and you asked for honest work." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Stop yes-ma'aming me," she said, and she reached up and put her hand against the side of his face, and he turned into it slightly the way a man turns toward warmth when he has been cold for a very long time, and she said softer, "You found more than work here, Cole. So did I." He covered her hand with his and held it there for a moment. Then he said, "I reckon I did." She smiled. Not the small, quickly controlled smile of a woman protecting herself. A real one, the full version, the one that changed her whole face. and that he suspected she had been keeping back since approximately the night they had spread documents across the kitchen table, and she had said, "This is not about saving the ranch anymore." The summer evening settled around the Hart Ranch sounds of a horse in the barn, a boy singing tunelessly to himself at the water trough, cattle shifting in the east pasture, the pines moving slightly above the ridge, and Cole Mercer stood in the yard of the only home he had chosen in 32 years of living, and understood with a clarity that required no argument and admitted no doubt that the hardest trail a man can ride is not the one that leads away from people. It is the one that leads him finally and without apology back to them and teaches him at long last that he deserves to stay.